When a world leader steps down, it's always huge news. But then the spotlight swings to someone, maybe not everyone outside, certain circles knows immediately.
Yeah.
That's kind of what happened when Jorge Bergoglio emerged as Pope Francis, right?
Exactly. Suddenly the question everywhere was, wait, who is this guy? It's a fascinating story.
Well, the whole trajectory is something else. A life moving along one path, then suddenly, bam, onto the world stage, bringing all that history, that perspective with him.
Mm-hmm. And that's what we want to dig into today in this deep dive. We're looking at the life, the journey of Pope Francis, drawing on, well, biographical sources we've reviewed.
Right. Going from his earliest days, Buenos Aires, all the way up to that moment in the Vatican. The goal is really to get a sense of the key moments, the influences, what actually shaped him.
So we're trying to get beyond just the headlines, look at the building blocks of his character, what experiences, what values made him the leader he became.
Okay, let's go back. Way back. Buenos Aires, Argentina. December 17th, 1936. Jorge Mario Bergoglio was born.
Yep. Family of Italian immigrants. His dad worked on the railways. His mom was a homemaker. He was the oldest, 5 kids in total.
Sounds like a pretty grounded start. Simple household.
Very much so. The sources really stress that. Not a lot of material wealth, maybe, but strong family ties, a sense of respect, the value of hard work. Those seem really central.
And it wasn't just his parents, was it? His grandmother, Rosa. She seems to pop up as quite important.
Oh, definitely. The stories mention her telling him tales of saints, fostering that early connection to God, to faith.
Those early stories can be so powerful, can't they?
Yeah.
Really shaping how you see the world later on.
Absolutely. They lay a foundation. And descriptions of him as a kid, quiet, curious, loved books.
And soccer. Big San Lorenzo fan, apparently.
Yes. Adds a human touch, doesn't it? Paints a picture of a thoughtful kid, but with normal passions, too.
So then, fast forward a bit. Teenage years. He studies chemistry at a technical high school.
Yeah, and even worked in a lab for a bit. You could almost see a different future, maybe in science.
It just shows how life can take unexpected turns.
It really does. And that science background,
Yeah.
maybe it points to a certain way of thinking. Logical, methodical.
Perhaps. But the sources also suggest, even then, he felt like something deeper was missing. A sense of calling maybe starting.
Exactly. And then comes a really critical moment. Age 21, he gets incredibly sick.
That lung infection, right? Life-threatening.
Very serious. Needed surgery, had part of his lung removed. That kind of brush with mortality, it changes you.
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
A massive wake-up call.
And the sources really point to a spiritual awakening during that recovery. Feeling this deeper connection to God, maybe a sense of being saved for a specific reason.
That feeling of purpose can be incredibly motivating, can't it?
Hugely. And it seems like it was the catalyst for his next big decision.
Which was joining the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits.
Right. He enters the seminary shortly after recovering.
What was it about the Jesuits specifically, do you think? What makes them distinct?
Well, they're known for a few key things within the church. Intellectual rigor is a big one. Education, scholarship, but also discipline, missionary work, and a strong emphasis on social justice.
So it's a path that values both thinking and doing, action in the world.
Precisely. And it seems like even as he started moving up within the church structure, he held on to this real simplicity in his own life.
Yeah, the stories about him refusing fancy cars, big houses.
Cooking his own meals, taking public transport. It wasn't just for show, apparently.
That's a pretty conscious choice, isn't it?
Mm.
Especially you gain more prominence.
It absolutely is. It sends a message, doesn't it, about where the church's focus should be with the poor, not isolated by privilege. It's a thread you see running right through his life.
Okay, now we have to touch on a really difficult period. Argentina in the 1970s. The Dirty War.
A truly dark time.
Huh.
Military dictatorship, disappearances, incredible fear. And he was a Jesuit leader then, provincial superior.
That must have put him in an incredibly precarious position. trying to lead, trying to protect people.
Extremely delicate. And look, the sources acknowledge this is a complex and controversial part of his past. There isn't one single narrative.
Right. There are criticisms, weren't there? That maybe he didn't do enough, didn't speak out forcefully enough against the regime.
Yes, those criticisms exist. But then there are also other accounts, stories of him working quietly behind the scenes, helping people hide, helping them escape the country.
Sounds like a classic moral tightrope walk during a brutal regime. Balancing, trying to help individuals without bringing the wrath of the government down on the entire church or putting more people at risk.
It's incredibly difficult to judge from the outside decades later. What we do know is that later, as Pope, he spoke about this time, acknowledged the church's failings, even prayed for forgiveness for its silence.
That willingness to confront a difficult past, that's significant in itself.
It suggests reflection, yeah. A desire to acknowledge the pain and complexity rather than just sweep it under the rug.
Okay, moving forward in time. He becomes Archbishop of Buenos Aires.
Mm-hmm. And that image of him as a different kind of leader really seems to solidify.
Still living simply. Small apartment, riding the bus.
Exactly. And apparently spending a lot of time in the villas, miserias, the slums, really listening to people, understanding their lives firsthand.
That direct contact must have been incredibly formative. Seeing poverty and struggle up close, not just reading reports about it.
You'd have to assume so. It likely deepened his empathy, his understanding of the systemic issues people faced. It grounds your perspective in a way nothing else can.
Then 2005, Pope John Paul II passes away. The conclave meets, and Bergoglio's name comes up.
Yes, he was apparently mentioned as a serious contender, a papabile, as they say.
But ultimately, Joseph Ratzinger is elected and becomes Pope Benedict XVI.
Right. And Bergoglio goes back to Buenos Aires, continues his work there. The sources suggest he wasn't, intensely campaigning for the job or anything. Seemed content in his role.
Which makes what happens next in 2013 even more of a surprise.
Totally unexpected for most people. Pope Benedict XVI announces his resignation.
Which is incredibly rare. Hasn't happened in centuries. The world was just stunned.
Absolutely. It threw everything open, intense speculation, the world watching Rome, waiting for that white smoke.
And then it comes. Habemus Papam. And Jorge Bergoglio steps out onto the balcony.
And for many people, it was a surprise. He was 76, considered relatively old. He wasn't a Vatican insider, didn't have that curial experience. He wasn't one of the globally famous cardinals.
So why him, do you think? What might the cardinals have been thinking?
Well, maybe his being an outsider was actually appealing, a fresh start. Maybe his pastoral focus, that connection to the poor in Latin America, resonated. Perhaps they felt the church needed a different kind of leader for this moment.
And then the name he chose, Francis.
Wow, yeah. That was immediate, powerful.
Instantly brings St. Francis of Assisi to mind, doesn't it? Poverty, humility, simplicity, love for creation.
And crucially, as the sources point out, no pope had ever chosen that name before. It was a statement right out of the gate.
What message did you take from that?
It signaled pretty clearly, I think, a desire to shift priorities. Focus on the poor, maybe live more simply, care for the environment. It set a whole new tone.
And his very first words and actions seemed to back that up. That simple, brothers and sisters, good evening.
So down to earth.
Fair.
And asking the crowd to pray for him before he blessed them, that humility was striking.
The refusing the traditional red mozzetta, little cape, opting for just the simple white cassock.
Yeah. And choosing to stay in the Casa Santa Marta, the Vatican guest house, instead of the Apostolic Palace. Using a simpler car. Small things, maybe, but hugely symbolic.
It felt like a deliberate stripping away of centuries of papal trapping, didn't it?
It really did. Humanizing the office, making it seem more accessible, more like a shepherd amongst the people.
And then some of those early actions, like during his first Holy Week, washing the feet of prisoners at a youth detention center.
And including young women and Muslims, in that ritual. That was huge.
How did that challenge things? Because traditionally that ritual was, well, different.
Traditionally, it reenacted Jesus washing the feet of his male apostles. By including women, people of other faiths, people in prison, he was sending a powerful message about inclusivity, about service extending to everyone, especially those on the margins. It was leadership as service, embodied.
So from that point on, you start seeing these key themes really emerge and define as papacy, right?
Definitely. Number one probably is this idea of a church for the poor.
Speaking out against greed,
Yeah.
inequality, what he called the economy that kills. Why has that been so central for him?
Well, it seems deeply rooted in his own experiences in Argentina, seeing poverty firsthand, and also in his reading of the Gospels. A core belief that the church must be on the side of the marginalized, must challenge injustice.
And then there's the emphasis on mercy and love. God's love being bigger than rules, welcoming people who felt excluded.
That famous off-the-cuff remark on the plane, right? About gay people seeking God. Who am I to judge?
That line went everywhere. What was the impact of that shift in tone?
It was huge. It signaled a more compassionate, pastoral approach, less focus on condemnation, more on understanding and accompaniment. It made a lot of people feel seen, welcomed, perhaps for the first time.
But that didn't mean everyone was happy, did it? The sources mentioned pushback.
Oh, for sure. Change is always hard, especially in a 2,000-year-old institution. Some within the church felt he was going too far, maybe diluting doctrine or causing confusion.
While others probably felt he wasn't going far enough on some issues.
Exactly. You're always navigating those tensions when you lead such a diverse global body. But he seemed pretty determined to stay his course.
Another massive theme, the environment. Laudato Si.
His encyclical on care for our common home, that was groundbreaking.
Framing climate change and environmental destruction not just as political or scientific issues, but as moral and spiritual ones. That really broadened the conversation, didn't it?
It absolutely did. By linking the cry of the earth with the cry of the poor, he connected environmental justice and social justice. He was speaking to everyone, not just Catholics, about our shared responsibility.
And his efforts on global peace, he traveled so much, didn't he? To places suffering from conflict, poverty.
Yes, visiting refugee camps, war-torn areas, those images of him embracing people, blessing the sick, just listening, they were very powerful.
I remember that moment he invited the presidents of Israel and Palestine to the Vatican Gardens to pray for peace.
A hugely symbolic gesture. Even if lasting peace didn't immediately follow, it was a powerful demonstration of dialogue, of trying to build bridges.
Even during the pandemic, remember that image? Him praying alone in a vast, empty, rain-swept St. Peter's Square.
Chilling and incredibly moving, it captured the world's feeling of isolation and fear, but also offered this image of steadfast faith and solidarity. It resonated way beyond the church.
And through all this global activity, the sources suggest he kept up a pretty simple personal life. Still cracking jokes, following his soccer team.
Making personal phone calls to people who wrote to him. Little things that reinforced that sense of him being grounded, authentic, not just playing a role.
But being Pope isn't easy. There were huge challenges he faced, too. Reforming the Vatican itself, for instance.
Oh, yeah. Tackling the Curia, dealing with financial scandals, secrecy, entrenched power structures. That's a massive undertaking.
Bound to meet resistance from within.
Absolutely. Deeply ingrained issues in any large, old institution. It required, and still requires, immense persistence.
And then the enormous shadow of the clerical abuse crisis.
A devastating issue for the church. The sources mention his meetings with survivors, the apologies he offered, the new rules and protocols he put in place for protection and accountability.
Though, again, complexities there. Opinions differ on how effective those measures have been, or if the response went far enough, fast enough.
It's true. It's an ongoing process, a deep wound. But his actions did represent a significant shift towards acknowledging the harm and trying to establish systems to prevent it, even if the implementation and results are still debated and scrutinized.
His focus on the poor and forgotten sometimes led to criticism, too, didn't it? Accusations of getting involved in politics.
Yes, some leaders or commentators felt he should stick to purely religious matters.
But he seemed to see defending human dignity, advocating for justice, as part of his faith in action, right?
Exactly. For him, it wasn't optional or political. It was a moral imperative flowing directly from the gospel message. You can't separate faith from how you treat the vulnerable or structure society.
Even Laudato Si, while praised by many, wasn't universally embraced.
No. Addressing climate change touches on huge economic interests, political ideologies, different worldviews, so it naturally drew skepticism and opposition from various corners, inside and outside the church.
And then, in more recent years, we saw his physical health becoming more of a challenge.
Yeah, the knee problems, the sciatica, sometimes needing a wheelchair. You could see him slowing down physically.
Yet mentally, he seemed just as sharp, still had that sense of humor.
Right. He'd joke about his health, about aging. It kind of demystified the papacy even more, showed the human reality of aging, even for a pope. It didn't seem to diminish his commitment, though.
And apparently, those simple habits continued. Calling ordinary folks, greeting the Vatican workers, daily prayer.
That consistency is really striking. It suggests these weren't just early gestures, but core parts of who he is.
He also had this way of talking about himself, didn't he? As a sinner, someone trying to do good but acknowledging mistakes.
That humility is quite disarming, coming from a figure of his stature. It makes him relatable, perhaps more credible to some, because it acknowledges imperfection.
So when you boil it all down, what seems to be the driving force?
The sources consistently point towards love, really. Love for God, yes, but expressed very practically through love for the poor, for the planet, for every single person, especially those overlooked. Service, compassion, justice, those seem to be the guiding stars.
Looking ahead then, thinking about his legacy post-2025, as our sources frame it, he really seems to have reshaped the image of the papacy, hasn't he?
Absolutely. That emphasis on simple living, on being a pastor first and foremost, on humility, it offers a different model. Whether that becomes the norm, we'll see, but he's certainly changed perceptions.
And all that travel, those visits to forgotten corners of the world, what was the long-term impact of that?
It sent a powerful message of solidarity. It told marginalized communities, you are seen, you matter. It positioned the church as an advocate on a global scale.
That message to refugees, you are not strangers, that really stuck with me.
A powerful call for compassion, for recognizing shared humanity in a world often building walls. It challenges us all.
And Laudato Si. Do you see that as having a lasting environmental legacy?
I think so. It fundamentally shifted the conversation for many, framing environmental care as a core moral and ethical issue for everyone, regardless of faith. It gave the climate movement a powerful moral voice.
Plus the focus on mercy, the year of mercy, seeing the church as a field hospital, a place for healing.
Yes, emphasizing God's forgiveness, welcoming people back. That focus on the compassionate side of faith could continue to shape the church's pastoral approach for a long time.
And the efforts on the abuse crisis, however imperfect, are ongoing. Establishing mechanisms for accountability.
Laying groundwork, yes. Creating structures intended to protect and demand transparency. The effectiveness is still being judged, but the intent to confront it marked a necessary, painful step.
So, wrapping this up, we've traced Jorge Bergoglio's journey from Buenos Aires through challenges and controversies to becoming Pope Francis. A leader defined by humility, service, a focus on the poor, the planet, and mercy. Quite a transformation, quite an impact.
It really has been a deep dive into a figure who undoubtedly made his mark on the world stage, prompting reflection both inside and outside the Catholic Church.
And it leaves us with something to think about, doesn't it? Even if you're not religious, how could that emphasis Francis placed on simple living, on compassion, on seeing the dignity in everyone, how could that apply in our own lives, our own communities?
That's the real takeaway question, isn't it? What does it mean to be, in your own way, a shepherd, a source of care and support for those around you, especially those who might be struggling or overlooked?
A challenging thought. If you want to explore more, digging into Laudato Si's itself is fascinating, or reading accounts of his encounters with people on the margins. Lots more to discover.
Definitely worth exploring further.